talk about, what you find out from each other about how you've been implementing peer critique?
Well, I guess we had like a couple different methods of critiques. I was saying that one of the methods, I have first and third grade, so we don't really get into like artist intent and like deep into stuff, and just kind of getting them used to talking about artwork. And I also have like 33 kids, so I put like 4 pieces up at a time, and just was kind of like, I prefaced it saying, you know, we're going to talk about our peers' artwork. You can't, you know, make any negative comments, you know, like that's not very nice to do, and so, you know, say something that you like, or say how this thing makes you feel, and then kind of get them talking about it, and sort of facilitating a discussion that way. And then Elvin had a different.
Oh yeah, for first and third grade, it's like, it was a really good way to start practicing critique or having you look at artwork. Is just to like, I used to do like drawing contests or coloring contests, so at least like the young people can kind of figure out what kind of art they like. And so I would let them go individually and vote on which piece they like the most, so that because at the younger age they're more swayed by whatever their friends are choosing, so then they have to make an individual choice about which piece they like the most. So they're simply being to put like an object next to the person's artwork, so they're like, I like this drawing, but you can't pick your drawing or just your friend's drawing, so it's like you don't know whose piece it is, just but I know I like this one for my individual reason why, and then that person then gets the prize. So it's like, it makes that, so it also makes that artists who did not get chosen, they have to think, okay, well, why didn't they choose mine? Maybe next time I should do this, or let me look at the one that was chosen, so maybe if I do something a little bit more like that next time, maybe I'll be chosen. So I mean, at least it's putting the ideas in the kid's head without just saying, why do you like this and stuff, because they might not be able to articulate that just yet. But also when it comes to, I have middle school kids, so it's just like, again, with asking the guiding questions and getting on how to view art, and then I started them off with viewing my work, and when it comes to giving critiques, like they can't use standard like words like, that looks good, or I don't like that because of it, you know what I mean? It's like you have to use like a bigger, I challenge the youth to use a bigger vocabulary, like, oh, well, your piece makes me feel excited because of blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Or I feel joy when I look at this, you know? And then in the beginning, they're only allowed to give constructive criticism because middle school students often get negative because it's easier to make fun of somebody than think about something that is good about someone. So I often challenge them to only use just like good terms first, good constructive criticism, and then I give negative criticism in the beginning so they can be mad at me, you know what I mean? And instead of each other. And so then later on, as we develop, then they'll at least know the type of language to use when it comes to critiquing someone's work.
Thank you.
To add, aside from what they said, just discussing the idea of like forbidden words and like ugly, stupid, like sad, man, like those basic words.
So how do you implement it differently though? Because you're in a different discipline. You're in live art. You're in dance. How does critique look different than in the visual arts, or do you find it's the same process?
I find it's a little bit different because it's like it happens and then it's over, unless it's recorded. So they have to be looking and remembering as they're looking at it that they wanted to say something about it, but they can't stand there and look at the dance move for a minute or two. Like it happens and then it's over. So that lends toward more like guttural feelings about it, and yet it was nice, it was good. So it makes it more difficult when there isn't something that they can record and look back on later to critique something else. And then it's like I said, like in the younger children's part doesn't have the vocabulary yet and like the cognitive abilities yet to critique what's going on. And then also just the memory of what happened 3 minutes ago when these people were up there doing what they were doing.
Is it, with dance, is it possible, so if you're, let me back up, you're not looking at a recording, you're looking at a live piece. Is it possible to have, to identify one thing that you want the students to look for? Either as an entire group or individually, they're looking for different things in that way. They can speak to that instead of trying to absorb everything that they've seen in that short period of time. And have you done that before, or how does that work?
Yeah, kind of on the other side, what I mentioned when we were talking about, I forget now what the strategy was, but you guys were talking about how dance is different, that...
Do it again?
Yeah, do it again, thank you. The do it again is, so we do it again, but we do it again focusing on different parts of the body. So that's the same thing. I'm just finished from the other side, so this group focus on this, this group focus on that, so same idea with the different focus.
Great. Thank you. This table.
Okay, for critique, yeah. I don't have them talk about whether they like it or whether it's good at all. And I would love it if they never did. I feel like a lot of times, especially with visual art, or I think with art in general, people try to interpret it or place a value judgment on it before they notice what's there. So my critiques are all about noticing what's there, what's in the frame. When I was talking with this group about it, I introduced it by showing professional work and using that as a way to teach vocabulary so they can identify what the background is, but then also identify what's in it, and then the foreground, same thing, and learn those words and practice using them. So then when we start looking at their work, their job is to use their new vocabulary as a way to say something about that person's image. So even just like, oh, they use the color red. Great, good job. What else? What's in the background? What's in the foreground? What do they choose to put in the frame? What did maybe they leave out? Those kinds of things. Not, is it good? Is it not good? And then as we get closer in on what they're trying to make or what their final project should look like, talking more about just whether it's effective, where could it be improved, those kinds of things. But that's more up to the artists themselves of okay, now that we see that and now this is what's coming through, this is what people are noticing, what do you want to change next time we shoot? How can you make it better?
For sure. So, for dance, I find it a bit challenging. But one of the ways I try to implement it is have activity at the end where kids get up in a circle and they basically just jump in and dance and let loose and do whatever they want with it. So, in a way, I try to focus more on the non-verbal way for them to critique themselves. Before we start, I always mention that try not to laugh at your fellow peers because if you're laughing, it tells me that, for one thing, maybe John is coming in there and you may look silly and he can go up, you're busy laughing, you're not the one even inside the circle, you're probably just standing by just watching while someone's going inside and giving out their effort. So, and then whenever the student does go in and they go out, I find that they usually won't be so, I guess, harsh on the other peers because they have been there before. They have danced in front of the other peers and they're gone out, so they know that it is difficult and that they kind of build some respect for each other, regardless of whether they may look silly or not. That's one way I try to focus on the non-verbal way of have them critique among themselves.
One exercise that I told them that in the beginning and the end, this is what I do with all the classes, but they say what their name is and how they're feeling, and then we all have to repeat that, so we honor everybody's feelings and emotions we repeat it, and they also have to, however they say it, we mimic it through our parties as well. And then at the end, and I've really, it's just all of a sudden I've got 5 minutes and I have to complete the big activity. So the thing that usually falls off first is the last reflection piece. And I always, it's really tough, but it's one activity that I tried, that I've done in the past that I want to do with this group is we've done part of it where you say, today I found it hard to do fill in the blank, or today I really enjoyed doing fill in the blank. We've done that on and off, but the third piece, or the addition to that, once they're comfortable talking about reflecting the day, is today I really enjoyed seeing Suze do XYZ, or student X doing this. Or today I had a hard time concentrating because sometimes people were talking while we were doing XYZ, and that critique, once they come with the basic, what I liked or didn't like, and now what they see, that's sort of the second level, but then it allows me, because a lot of those things I would have talked about throughout, so it allows me to not lead the conversation, but have people's peers indirectly saying, maybe you shouldn't be talking so much. And then they're allowed to say, Suze did this when it's a positive thing, and then when it's not a positive thing, they just say, I found it hard to concentrate sometimes because we're making a noise as a group. And then those people, and some you can see those people who know I was making noise will sort of look down, or they'll know, oh, she's talking about me, but she's not ranking his or her thing. And it's not coming from the teacher, it's just coming from their peers. So that's really the part that I want to get to, but I just haven't been able to do it with this group, and I think they're more than ready to hear that. And I think whenever they can hear, peer critiques are nice because it's not the teacher now, it's an equal that's saying, hey, you could do a little bit better, you could put up your socks a little bit more, and it's easier to, I think, receive when that kind of criticism is coming from a peer as opposed to the teacher.
Yeah, the shout-outs are great, especially when they come from peers. Yeah. So this is great, right? Just as in itself, like we already see, we've got a treasure trove of kind of like dynamic practices, ways that critique can happen. It doesn't have to be, it can be the formal critique at the beginning or the end of class. It can be, we're looking at a professional artist's work and then unpacking it from there. It can be this kind of more empathic critique where we're thinking about how our actions affect others or how that affects the space. It can be do it again and we're looking at a specific part where we are really focused looking. Right, so as we think about peer critique, and we really want you all to be practicing this on a weekly basis, it's not that it's every week I do the same critique. Maybe you do build your class that way, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? You can make it dynamic, and you can, I'm not going to get a chance to go through this with us now, because I want Lingela to take us through a quick process. But in the facilitator's guide, starting on page 10, and going a couple pages following that, we started to try to think through kind of a four-step or scaffolded process, right? Where we start out with something that's like what Jen did, the VTS process or Socratic questioning, whatever you want to call it, right? And then we begin to move to something that's more empathic, where we get the students to start thinking about how can I be constructive about my criticism and think about mutual reciprocity, how our interpersonal relationship, right, and how that's practiced through the way I give comments, the way they're received, and how critique is more than just critique, right? It's a community building exercise. The third process is more about focusing on that arts language, right? So beginning to think about those foundational concepts and how do we drive home ideas about within dance, shape, or space, or time, or energy by very focused looking. And then the final one is really thinking about how and I've seen Corin do this wonderfully, how do you get your class to take a really look closely at an artwork, a style of artwork, understand it, understand the artist's methods, and then deconstruct that, the students begin to understand that, and then take that as the kind of framework for how they build a project. And then they judge their success or failure or whatever off of understanding, that in this particular painting, it was all about color theory. Did we do that the way we wanted to do that in the artwork we created? So use that as a tool as you begin to integrate peer critique into your class consistently, and thinking about how do I move my class along to become more practiced, right, in this in peer critique or artist critique, and how do we make it more complex, or how do we deepen it as we go along? So I'm going to turn it over to Mungela to take us through something.
Okay, I guess I'll talk about it because we're running out of time.
Okay.
All right. So I'm talking about peer critique and how sort of to infuse. I'm a drama teacher, and how to use peer critique as a way to make sure that students understand the vocabulary that we're doing. Students understand that we're using. Students understand their role in sort of being an individual within a group setting, and how the choices that they make impact, the group and whatever the goals are. Mm-hmm. So I do this choice and consequences workshop, and I use drama and theater because what I do is the lesson before that I'll do improv, where we learn to. I have an improv book that will actually 2 lessons before we do it using a book, and they have specific scenarios, and then after that I have the kids create their own improv situation, so it's theirs, it's more personal. And then after that I take that and do the choice and consequences workshop. So what I try and do is the students understand that in an improv you have to introduce who the characters are, what the relationship is, and where they are, and then what is the conflict, and then how's the conflict solved. So they do that beforehand, and then the next day I said, okay, now, so we did this story, you came up with a conflict, and et cetera, et cetera. So I would like to do that again. Now let's find a way to create a different outcome, a positive consequence. So let's see where can we make choices to lead to a more positive consequence. And when they start doing it the second time around, you can say pause, and they have to freeze. And there has to be an audience, so half the class is sitting down. But I can freeze them, and then when it comes to, can you hear this person's voice, or do you know what the relationship is, audience? And then they say no. And I say, well, what's a possible way that they can introduce each other within the play? Then somebody makes a suggestion, say, okay, group, you understand that? Then I can unpause it and play it. Or I can pause it and say, can you see them? Okay, so that person is playing basketball. Are they facing the audience? What would be the best way for us to see what they're doing? They'll have to turn around and look at us. Very good. Or stage positioning and projection, things of that nature. I can pause and discuss with the audience while the performers are listening. And then when I unpause, they'll take a criticism and come back to it. And then also at the end, once they're done with whatever they do, I can say, I'll have the audience analyze what did they see, and so what is the conflict, what's the characters, what was their relationship, and then at the end I'll say, now, do you think that there's an opportunity for a different outcome? Well, can you maybe discuss what that outcome is and how we might be able to reach that? And then I might say to the group, okay, go back, talk about what's happened, and present this again. And it's sort of a more interactive way of the students, the audience, and the performers sort of talking about things. And then also when they're on stage, when they get this idea, I can make different choices with the idea that I want a different consequence. They can enact this idea that in any situation, you make a series of choices as an individual, and depending on what you want your outcome to be or your goal to be, you have to think very carefully about those choices. So if we get into that, in this group, we'll talk a lot about group dynamics and how, look, you guys have a lot of energy, you're great, I like you, but you have to learn to be quiet, and one person talks at a time. And sometimes when you're talking, I'm quiet as well, because it's only one of us. And the hardest thing in the group, and not a lot better at it, is just getting to be quiet and focus. And so within some of these things, I would say, well, all the things that you're doing now, it shows how you as one individual, you make a series of choices, and those choices impact everybody else. So with the improv that we're doing, I would often say, see, what's happening right now, if you think of our culture as this after-school program, when you as an individual, when I'm teaching, and you act out, you make a choice, and that choice leads up to a consequence that impacts the entire class. And that's why it's very difficult for me, when one person acts out because it needs to X, Y, Z, and then I can say sometimes even the people who are focused get really impatient because you make the choice, and then now they want to lash in, and I understand that they're frustrated, and it's hard, but even the people who are impatient, I just want you to just take care of yourself, and you try and be centered and focused, and then hopefully over time everybody will learn. So I really try and use that workshop to talk about the different vocabulary that we're doing, to talk about techniques for teaching drama, and then I use that to see, like, as our own group, as our own culture, as this after-school drama program, what can we learn from this improv and choices and consequences workshop that we can apply to our day-to-day, just day-to-day program, and the role, how one individual can disrupt the entire class, and how because of that, not to take away your last 5 minutes where you can play whatever game you want, but because it took so long for us as a group to be disciplined and calm down, we lose some of the special teaching time.
So, I mean, I really wish we had gotten a chance to do it. But I think, one of the things that I thought was so effective about it was the way that you interwove so many things, right? It was the arts, vocabulary, and techniques and language. Like I heard the kids saying, V, like to get, come back to stage position.
Yeah.
Right, so they were very tuned into that. But then it was also very much about the culture aspect, right, of building the community, and the kids were clearly speaking to that. It was also very much about interpersonal dynamics and how do we deal good with each other, right? How do we listen, and right? So they were practicing all these things together in this really wonderfully, composed method, right? And that's why I wanted to use that as an example, because I think part of what we're always after is this arts culture integration, SEL integration as well, right? And so thinking about, I just wanted to ask, like, how did you think about creating that method, or is that something you learned? Some of it seems Boalian to me. Like, how did you think about building that method for the kind of critique workshop process?
I mean, I think it's something that it was a combination, that the choice and consequences workshop is something that I learned at Shanti, but then I turned in the improv stuff because it allows me to teach drama, but then I started moving away from using the improv situation. That's a book that I always use, but I was like, but as soon as if they can get those concepts and use their own improv, then it becomes closer to them. But then also if it's closer to their lives, and they can see how in every situation that I'm involved in, realistically, I make choices. And I gotta start being aware that these type of choices will lead me there, and these ones will lead me there, and these ones might lead me there. And so I have to start being very aware that as soon as something comes up, I have 2 or 3 or 4 options, and I have to start picking them carefully, because if it's about their lives, I think it sticks a little bit better. So it was just over time, I was just like, I can just keep just sort of piling on things, and the closer that everything we do is to their lives, I think the more it sticks with them. But then also in terms of culture, with this group in particular, I know Changing Worlds will be emphasizing that word, is that I've tried to break it down in terms of a way to model culture is that they think about, the culture of me as an individual, which is my self-identity, the culture of me in the after-school program, versus the culture of me in my day-to-day classroom, versus the culture of me at home in my family, versus the culture of me in the streets with my friends. And I've tried to sort of model that way, as you're always in a different sort of subcultural little group. I just call it, that's one culture, that's one culture, that's one culture. And I'm trying to get them to see their role in those different cultures, and how, and sometimes things they don't like about those cultures, but how they can see that in different settings, they play a particular role. And whenever they have to interact with somebody in that particular setting, they now should think about, if there's a conflict, I have a few consequences that I need to pick and make choices based on where I want to go. So I really just try to sort of pack it all together. But to me, the concept of culture, by using things that they are familiar with, home, school, in the neighborhood, or even right now in Changing World setting, I think to me, I'm trying to hopefully help them understand in very tangible terms what we're trying to do with them.
any questions or comments or ideas about anything spark anything for you about how you utilize peer critique or things you want to try or
I say I'm in love with the idea of having what students do in a art context becomes things they do in their life, and it's really encouraging them to acknowledge that what you're doing here isn't just for here. But it could be for school, it could be for home, it could be for what happens with you and your sister and your cousin and your grandma. That those types of behavior, like there's like continuity there, that can be really helpful for them.
You know, the only thing I've ever done that it helps to structure that, if kids are shy, is I put, if there's 6 or 7 kids or 10 or 12, doesn't matter, I would put the kids' names on index cards, shuffle the cards, and then everyone gets a certain amount of cards, and then that student is asked to do an affirmation about something that they've seen or noticed about that other colleague in their classroom. So it allows everyone, because then all the cards are distributed, so everyone gets like 3 shout outs from 3 different people, and so it gives a little more structure to it. And I think another way to do the challenges is I wish we would ... and then you can have the kids just kind of free think. I wish we would, stop doing the reflection first. Yeah, but I mean that have the kids kind of talk about classroom culture and have them, say like next time we should try this if they want to talk about changing the culture of the classroom.
Right. So that's great. So I mean, like in this facilitator's guide, some of the things that are really pushed are like thinking about like how do you introduce just the question, but then how do you create guiding, further guiding questions? Like if your kids are kind of stalled, how do you give them the breadcrumbs to keep opening up space to talk about work? So, and then one thing I wanted to come back to something that Jenkins said when he did his example about kind of critique or feedback, which I just love the idea of thinking about how can I push a critique method or feedback method to be in the language of the style of the form itself, right? So the hip hop cipher as this space, like that is the commentary, like the circle, giving the good energy, right, to the person in the middle of the circle and learning to practice that, right? That is its own method of feedback. So I think you can think deeper about what this is peer critique, and it's all about at bottom about learning to look, think, articulate, talk, and build that community in a deeper sort of way.
Yeah, and I think once you do it once, I mean, the kids will start to naturally do it. They're just not used to complimenting each other, like you were saying. It's like they're just used to giving each other a hard time. So this is a whole new kind of atmosphere for them.
So one thing that I found really useful in the website was this hearts, I forget what it's called, but this torn hearts exercise. I just did it for the first time with this group, where you read a story about a kid's day where the sister, the mother, the kids in the bus, the teacher, this child's morning, and how by the time their first period starts, they've had like 5 or 6 different put downs. And every time that there's a put down, each student has a little piece of cut out heart, and they fold it or they make a tear or whatever. And then you reread the story, and then when it gets to the put down, you say it, then you pause, and you have the students come up with a put up. And at least for my kids, in a very small way, when I say, okay, now remember, instead of put down, just do put ups. They know exactly what it means. And I had them actually, I had some of them, because some of them went there the next day, but write a story where they remember where they were being put down. And then I had them talk about how they can reverse some of those put downs, like, yeah, this person should have said to me X, Y, Z instead of A, B, C. And now I know when I talk about put ups, they know exactly what it is. And I made them stick their hearts in their books And some of them were mad because their hearts were all wrinkled. Because you didn't tell us it's going to have to go on a book of the track. And I want you to have a visual reminder. So every time you put somebody down or somebody puts you down, you have this visual reminder of what somebody's heart looks like after going through a tough period. So you just can maintain that. But to me, it's been very helpful. And so peer critique and understanding the language that you use really does impact somebody's day.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. So look forward to, coming in and watching this in process with you, and really invite you to imagine, like, how do I take this further, right? There's words on the page that you activate. I'm an artist as well, so modify it and make it work for your, the communities you're working with.
We have these places.
I don't know.